Pikmin is an experience that left me wanting more. For as many interesting gameplay ideas that the game introduces, it felt like none of them had the ability to be explored to their fullest potential in the game's short runtime. And for a first-time playthrough of a series that is positioned as one of Nintendo's heaviest hitters, always on the front lines of the game developing giants, I thought that was disappointing. However, those same ideas with a longer runtime and more challenge is an idea that is endlessly promising, and something that I knew the sequel, Pikmin 2, was guaranteeing before I even started the series. But despite all that, this was also the game that I knew the least about before going in. Aside from a couple pretty negative first impressions, Pikmin 2 is the one I've seen talked about the least online. But surely there's no correlation for that, right? Hi everyone, I'm RVRocks, and Pikmin 2 reunites us with Captain Olimar as he returns to planet Hokotate, where he discovers that his employer, the Hokotate Freight, is in some massive debt, leading to your ship, the SS Dolphin, getting scrapped. Olimar shares the story of his journey to PNF 404, and the capitalistic greed lights up in the president's eyes, sending Olimar and newbie employee Louie back to the planet in order to get some treasure to sell to pay off their $10,000 debt. And much like the first game, Pikmin 2 throws you straight into its gameplay. Starting off with our two captains getting separated, both of whom are playable this go around, your ship tells you just about everything you could possibly need to know about Pikmin, like how you can throw them, collect them, send out different packs to do different things, and maintain that strong Dandori gameplay you loved from the first. And here is the first of many changes that ground my gears in Pikmin 2. This ship talks too damn much. The first game had a very relaxed attitude towards tutorials. Stuff like the individual Pikmin's abilities was always told to the player in diegetic ways where you could naturally discover them and experiment with them before Olimar overtly told you how they worked. In this game, you discover a new thing, the game will fade to black, play a cutscene, show a wealth of dialogue with a text animation that I find oddly difficult to read, and then you can finally play. But when you go and grab the thing, it does it all again. This blatant disregard for the player's time, especially when 90% of the gameplay in the early sections is one-to-one with the first Pikmin's gameplay, is something that really put me off from Pikmin 2. It just takes the wind out of your sails every time. Obviously, this becomes less of an issue as the game continues on, as there are less overt tutorials and less things to learn about, but it makes those first couple hours really hard to get through, especially after I played the first. After enough ship talking, you get to the real meat and potatoes of this experience. We are no longer dealing with the large open levels of the first, now the main gameplay loop takes place in these caves. The caves take the more open, free-form gameplay of the first and condense it into smaller, semi-randomized challenges. In these caves, since you don't have access to the onions, you cannot repopulate your Pikmin supply, so whatever you go in with, you have to keep alive or face the consequences. And it's here you are introduced to 3 new types of Pikmin, all of which being found exclusively in the caves. The white Pikmin are the fastest movers and can find items buried in the ground that no one else can dig up. The purple Pikmin are much stronger, and just one has the strength of 10 regular Pikmin, at the price of being much slower. And my personal favorite of this game, the Bulbmin, the Bulborb Pikmin hybrids, are pretty much jacks of all trades that can't be brought back up onto the surface with you, so when they're given to you, it's basically the game giving you a little extra for this cave because you probably need it. I think how you feel about the cave system will be the determining factor on whether or not you are at all interested in Pikmin 2. And personally, I both loved and hated separate parts of this system. On one hand, it attaches more value to the individual Pikmin, one thing I criticized and received a lot of backlash over in the first game. In the first Pikmin, 20 lost Pikmin to a boss could easily be replaced by 40 more in around 5 minutes. In Pikmin 2, 20 lost Pikmin could spell doom for you being able to complete the rest of the cave. And I do like that. It gives me more reason to be calculated with my movements. But on the other hand, at times it feels more like it's just cheap difficulty rather than actual challenge. Having to replay a level, let alone multiple levels, because I didn't realize that I'd need white Pikmin to find an item that's randomly buried in the ground over here, That's not interesting gameplay. That's just annoying. And annoying is the word that I would use to describe most of Pikmin 2's biggest challenges. Yeah, Dandori issue or whatever, but losing all of my Pikmin in one fell swoop, causing me to either exit out of the game and reset, or do the walk of shame back to the base level to recoup my losses, was not my favorite thing to do. And for as much as the game loved to spoon-feed me tutorials in the early areas, there are a couple really big trial by fire asks from the player in the late game that had me tearing my hair out. In fact, I would say that Pikmin 2 is probably the angriest I have gotten at a game since I was back in my Destiny days, and that is really saying something. I don't mind the extra challenge, I really don't, but there's a fine line between challenging the player and so impossibly frustrating that I give up playing Pikmin 2 and instead make a whole video on Five Nights at Freddy's first, and it's a line that I find Pikmin 2 walks all too often. Not helping matters are the butt-ugly graphics that call the caves home. The first Pikmin has aged, I won't deny you that, but the open aesthetics of each level were really nice, regardless of how dated they were. And Pikmin 2 follows that trend in the above ground areas, of which there are 4 this time, each loosely based on one of the 4 seasons. But the caves are much smaller and far less detailed, so most of the time they just look kinda gross. There are a couple with really cool themes. I personally dug the pipes and the children's play area levels, but for every one of those you get around 4 of the same gray, dull looking caves that all blend together. And speaking of things that I liked about the first game that didn't come back in the second, time matters far less in this one, and that really sucks. The first game had a limit of 30 days with 15 minutes a day. This game has no limit on days, and while the days are still 15 minutes, that clock pauses while you are in the caves, which is most of the game. It creates the exact opposite environment from the first game. Where I once felt it was too easy, but the looks and time management were excellent, it's now much harder, but the aesthetics are worse, and the time management system is basically just tacked on. And tacked on is the name of the game here, with so many things that get introduced that you think that there's gonna be something interesting there, and then they just kinda don't do anything with it. You have this big debt, and you're paying it off, treasure by treasure, but once you pay it off, you just come back to PNF 404 with the president and a fancy gold ship to get even more treasure. I fully expected there to be a Luigi's Mansion style, here's how big Hokotate Freight became with all the money you got, but there's nothing like that, just Louie needing to be saved. You think that the 3 new Pikmin types are gonna change the game, but with them not having onions and instead being found exclusively in caves by converting existing Pikmin to new colors, it's just something that you have to farm for. And let me tell you, farming did not feel very good in this game. The Pikmin are more individually competent. You have more upgrades, including a surprisingly effective melee combo, and you can control 2 captains this time. But with time meaning essentially nothing in this game, despite all of these enhancements, there's far more downtime just waiting for everything to happen. You are incentivized to move very slowly and carefully, when the series seems to want you to do everything as fast and efficiently as possible. I am sure there's a middle ground between these 2 ideas, but Pikmin 2 does not hit it. It's almost laughable how incredibly quickly they do away with basically every aspect of the first game that I thought would be series staples. I loved the calculated, open, high stakes driven by survival, but eerily lonely expedition I went on in the first game. So naturally, the second game should be more chaotic, tutorial filled, with low stakes driven exclusively by greed, and with letters to a wealth of ancillary characters every night. It's not necessarily a negative. I am sure for everything I find disappointing, there's somebody who loves the change, but I find it funny how almost everything I complimented about the last game is done away with immediately in the sequel. However, the inverse is also true, because the one thing I complained about in the last video was the combat, and that has been improved dramatically here. My main complaint with Pikmin 1's combat was the lack of strategy in it. For a game that cemented itself for interesting strategic maneuvers, the combat was essentially just mashing the A button with little risk or reason for any more actions past that. But to my delight, Pikmin 2 from the outset lets you know that that shit is not gonna fly anymore. This game is really fucking hard. Or perhaps hard to adjust to after the last game, let me be so careless with my movements. This game takes 2 major strides in making the combat more interesting. They made the throwing more dynamic, and they added a whole bunch of new enemies. Every enemy now has a weak spot of sorts, where if you throw a Pikmin at them, they will be stunned. Some will even go down instantly, meaning that in your mindless throwing, you now have a secondary objective of hit their weak spot at all times. It's like headshots in a first-person shooter. In the heat of the moment, you might not be able to always get it, but sometimes you can accidentally clip it and still get all the benefits. Alongside that, our aforementioned friends, the white Pikmin, poison enemies if they're eaten, and the purple ones can stun enemies, and suddenly there's incentive to throw anything but the red Pikmin at them. There are now enemies of each elemental type, so you have even more excuses to use every single one of your Pikmin. And if their element affects your Pikmin, you can save them with a simple whistle, giving a little back and forth to every encounter. It creates an environment where there is as much thought being put into who I throw at enemies as there is to who I throw at certain objects, something that the first game was sorely lacking. And right here, I also want to mention that you should absolutely be playing with motion controls. I'm the type to resist all forms of motion controls because even though they are more precise and oftentimes give a direct gameplay advantage, I'm lazy. But in Pikmin, if you are playing without motion controls, you are effectively playing with half of the available attacking range. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Start out with motion controls instead of deciding to try them on a whim and realizing you spent the entirety of the first game and most of the second playing with the objective worst control scheme. As for the enemies, earlier I mentioned how the individual Pikmin felt more competent, and that stands to be true, but they are all the more useless against this game's impressive arsenal of baddies. There's more variation on Bulborbs, there's more bosses, there's these evil boulder spitting guys who would routinely take out 40 of my Pikmin before I even noticed them every time I encountered them. And variation is the name of the game here, because you can only fight so many of one guy before you know all of his tricks, so Pikmin 2 gives you a lot of guys' tricks to learn, and once you think you know them, mixes them all together. Most of the enemies here still follow the basic pattern of wind up, attack, wait, and repeat, but a couple more enemy types really spices up the gameplay. Completely mobbing enemies is still my favorite way to go. Throwing all 100 onto one guy and watching him melt in real time is still an unmatched satisfaction for me personally, but this game forces upon you situations where you can't logically have 100 Pikmin, so you're actually incentivized to plan around the enemies. I can't bring water Pikmin to fight the fire guy, but the pathway is across water, so I need to mobilize a select task force of red Pikmin and take care of the fire guy with minimal numbers. And the game is full of interesting encounters like this, ones where you can almost feel the shit-eating grin of the Nintendo employee who designed it. Combine that with the more interesting ideas added to your throwing and the upgrades that you get throughout all the different caves for Olimar, Louie, and the President, and you have a game that, while debatably weaker and undoubtedly more frustrating than its predecessor, I couldn't help but love. When I first talked about Pikmin, my main thesis statement was that while I loved the game, I did not know if it necessarily held a mass market appeal. And Pikmin 2 is that times 10. Questionable decisions permeate throughout the entire experience, but none of them really bog down that standard Pikmin gameplay I fell in love with so much in the first game, and I think that's intentional. Pikmin has always been known as a more niche series from my understanding, and it feels like even Nintendo knew that back in the day, and created a game that is made exclusively for the hardcore Pikmin crowd. Higher difficulty, more types of Pikmin to micromanage, and a much longer experience, it's clear that this game is for the people who loved the first one, and nobody else. And you might be thinking, well, duh, of course Pikmin 2 is made for people who played Pikmin 1. And I would agree that that would normally make sense, but gaming, and more specifically Nintendo gaming, usually doesn't operate like that. Mario, Splatoon, Animal Crossing, Zelda, none of Nintendo's main franchises typically work in a linear sequel fashion. Even Metroid, arguably the most story-focused Nintendo series, does a sort of soft reset with every new mainline entry. And in that sense, I find Pikmin 2 endlessly fascinating. It is one of the only true sequels to a Nintendo game. Gameplay-wise, story-wise, everything-wise. And that makes it even harder to recommend than the first. I liked Pikmin 2 more, but I think it's the worst game of the two. Does that make sense? Is there a word for that? For somebody who likes something more than they think it's good? Oh haha. Pikmin 2 is as unexciting as it is challenging. And while it does its best to broaden the scope of the world and the gameplay, it also does away with a lot of what I liked about the first game. And with that context considered, if my feelings are at all reflective of a portion of this game's audience, it's no surprise that Pikmin 3 took almost a decade after this one. And from what I know of the game, it takes the more traditional Nintendo soft reset approach to its universe. And that is a scenario that I am very excited to explore. But today, I just have Pikmin 2. And while I adored most of my time with the game, there are too many issues that I have with the foundational core of this experience that I can't help but feel that the game is just untapped potential. And if you think that my channel taps into its appropriate amount of potential, then why don't you subscribe to RVRocks and ring the bell, like this video, and comment your thoughts on Pikmin 2. Pick month 2 out of 4 is done. And just like I said, I am gonna need to stretch the definition of a month. Peace and love, thank you for allowing me that, you're the best. And because I know all of you girlies and gamers are gonna wanna roast me in the comments for it, I ended this game on my 30th day with 25 hours of playtime with a staggering 1,446 Pikmin lost. I do not know if these numbers are considered good or bad by community standards, so please let me know either in the comments or on one of my many other social medias, all to be found at RVRocks Official. But before you do any of that, I have been RVRocks, and thank you so much for watching. See ya!